What's up, Crusaders? Welcome back to another episode of Arcade Crusade. Today's video, we are going to start working on the Whirlwind. This will be part 1 in the Whirlwind cleanup series. That's right, we're not going to do a full restoration on Whirlwind right now. The playfield's actually really clean. A lot of the plastics have been replaced. Looks like the ramp has been flame polished, or either replaced with a new ramp. The ramp looks really nice. So a lot of this work's already been done that we normally do. So on this one, it's just gonna be a lot of cleanup. We're gonna rebuild the flippers. We're gonna change the cabinet buttons and leaf switches for the flippers. We are going to put in NV RAM, change some ribbon cables. It's just gonna be a new topper because the old topper was completely cracked. I already removed it. Just major cleanup stuff, get it playing nice and smooth. We'll just go ahead and do that for now, and then when it needs a full restoration down the road, we'll do a full restoration. But right now, it's just going to be a quick cleanup. So the first thing that I want to attack in this is I want to change the leaf switches for the flipper buttons, and I want to swap out the flipper buttons with new plastic yellow ones. So I got the camera set up, and you'll notice actually this game has Pin Graphics side blades, which I think is a must for this game. They just look awesome. So I got the light turned up here and we're zoomed in, and what I want to replace is I want to replace this leaf switch with a brand new one, and I want to replace this button with a new shiny one. We're going to reuse the paddle nut there. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to come at the leaf switch, and this only has 2 wires soldered to it, so I got my soldering iron hooked up inside the cabinet. And I'm just gonna slowly, I'm gonna open the coin door so it's out of the way. It'll just make my life a little bit easier. So just 2 screws on this leaf switch here, and 2 wires and a capacitor. I'm not replacing the capacitor, I'm gonna use the original capacitor. And before we do any soldering, I'm going to swap this one out. These are long screws. Alright, so that's completely out, and this one looks to be out. Okay, so that's completely removed. Now I'm going to come at the paddle nut here and just try to get in here and loosen that. And it should be enough for our button to come out. I'm just kind of trying to scrape some of the grime down off the side of this cabinet here. Alright, so that is the old button removed right there. And now I'll go ahead, and I got a brand new button to put on. We'll go ahead and put that on, and then we will get ready to solder in our new switch. Alright, so we got our button in, put our paddle nut on. Alright, now I should be able to two-hand this. Alright, nice and tight on the side of the cabinet. I'll give it just a little more of a twist. But that is nice and tight. So that button's been replaced. Now we are just going to be looking at our new switch here. And it looks like the capacitor just goes on both legs along with the wires. So I'm going to take a picture of how this one is, and then we will swap the wires and the capacitor over to the new one. Alright, so I went ahead and I got the capacitor moved over from the old switch, and actually what I'm going to do is, now that I got the cap moved over and soldered on, I'm going to go ahead and screw the new switch into the cabinet here. So this is just going to go on the exact same way we took the other one off. And just make sure your holes are lined up. And this will just make it easier, so we actually have the leaf switch secured as we are trying to solder on our wires. So again, I'm just trying to tighten this up as we put this on. Alright, so just make sure screws are nice and tight. Alright, nice and tight there. And nice and tight there. And we'll have to set the gap properly on that. And actually I might shift it over a little bit, just so we're more even with the button. You want it to be straight on with the button. Right there is pretty even. I'm just going to tighten both of these. That is tight, and that is tight. So now we got the brand new switch on, and looking at it from the way we are, our orange wire is going to be this back wire down here, and I'm going to come here with my orange wire on this back one. We got a ton of solder on there, and I'm just going to hold it in place while it hardens. And I don't like how it's sitting on the side there. There we go, hardened in place, nice and solid. And we are going to do the same thing with our blue wire now. So again, just apply some heat, get it exactly where you want it. Actually, I might try to go, yeah, I'd prefer to go higher up, like right there. We got a bunch of heat on that, and now it's holding in place. So now I added, we got a real strong connection. I'm pulling on the orange wire, it's not going anywhere. Pulling on this one, it's not going anywhere. Our capacitor's in place. So we got both of those completely transferred over to our brand new switch. Now, we will want our switch to be gapped properly. It should be open. So I'm just going to try to give it a little push. So I'm just going to bend this at the bottom with my screwdriver as well. You just want to get a little bend in it so your switch is properly gapped. And you want to do it low enough so that it holds the bend. Yeah, and compared to the original, we got a nice proper gap right there. So I guess with these switches, your leaf switch adjustment tool is a little too big for it to work properly. So you just kind of gotta bend it with a small flat head to get it right, but that's good button movement right there. And we're hitting it right where we would want to. We got a nice gap there. I might make the gap a little bit smaller. I mean, compared to the original though, yeah, that's about an equivalent gap. All right, so now that we got that one done, I'm gonna go ahead and the way I have this cabinet set up right now, now that we got this one done, I have this game against the wall right here, so there's really gonna be no good way for me to film this side, but I'm basically gonna do the exact same thing on this side. So I'm gonna get the capacitor moved over to the new switch and then replace the button, solder on my wires, and go from there. So we're gonna do the exact same thing we did here on this side, then we'll rebuild our shooter rod, and then from there we can start rebuilding our flippers and doing everything else we're gonna do with this game. So I'm just gonna repeat exactly what I did right here on the other side. All right guys, so I went ahead and I got the double switch on this side. It's got 2 capacitors, 3 wires. We got a nice strong solder connection. I'm pulling on the wires. Same with this side. Our leaf switches are properly gapped, so they are making contact just the way that we want them to. Yep, those are good to go. So now we are going to rebuild the shooter rod really quick. This should take relatively no time. All right, so the first thing that's gonna go on is we got our big spring and then our flat washer is going to go on. So we got our flat washer and our big spring on. Then we are going to put the shooter sleeve in, and that's going to go with the flanged end like this, and we are going to shove our rod through, and then another flat washer on the other side of the shooter sleeve. So that's all of that, and then the last thing is going to be our compression spring, our E-clip, and then our rubber. So we can put our compression spring on and just kind of hold it like so, push down on our E-clip, and you'll hear it snap in just like we heard. That goes on. Nice solid shooter. And while we're in here, I should probably tighten this before we do anything else. Yeah, it's nice and tight. And there's 3 screws here. One's on the ground cable, and the ground one actually was a little bit loose, so it's a good thing we tightened that. And last but not least, we got our black shooter tip, and just go ahead and push that all the way on. And now we have a fully rebuilt shooter rod the correct way. This was missing parts, so then I figured why not rebuild the entire thing. So now it's looking nice and solid. All right, so that is done. Now we can get ready to work on the flippers. So I'm just gonna get this here and we will zoom in. We need to rebuild these flippers, and I'm gonna start with the right flipper, because actually this right flipper, I had the coil actually burned up and the coil sleeve melted to the actual flipper itself. So I got this loosened right here, our pawl, and let me turn this. So I got our pawl loosened right here as much as you would want it to be. And all I'm gonna do is just kind of work this flipper side to side and just get it out. So it's starting to budge now. And there we go. All right, so there's our old, and this is cracked. You can actually see it's cracked right at the tip there, so this is garbage, and this is why I buy new flipper bats. All right, so that's taken out, and the next thing you're gonna do is on System 11 flippers, you have these yellow capacitors that are connected to your end of stroke switch. System 11, it's a lot easier to pull the entire flipper assembly out and rebuild it on the bench instead of having to drop the coil down and do everything like that. So all we need to do is pull these two wires off of our coil. So we got our blue and yellow on top, and that is just our striped wire there. So again, I'm just pulling here, and I don't really care too much. And there we go, that's pulled off. And now we will get our blue and purple. And that's now pulled off as well. And I'm just trying to get all the solder off of these that I can. All right, and those are now nice and cleaned up. And we got both wires pulled off of this. So now we are completely free from the playfield. And you can see this flipper is completely seized inside this coil. We are completely free now. So what we can do is I'm gonna get my 1/4-inch nut driver, and I'm gonna take all of these wood screws out of the bottom of the playfield, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go take this flipper, and I'm going to walk you guys through how to rebuild this flipper on the bench. We'll come back, get it set up, lined up, tighten the pawl, and then this will be our top right flipper completely rebuilt. So I'm going to get my 1/4-inch nut driver and take this off, and then we will take a look at this on the bench. All right guys, so I removed the, well, it's 7 in this case because there's an insert in the way, but what would normally be 8 1/4-inch wood screws from the bottom of the playfield. So our entire flipper assembly is completely loose from the game. Now there's one thing I recommend before we put on the new capacitor, the new end of stroke switch, and we have a new coil for this one, which is right here, because the coil on this one's bad, it melted up. My guess is, I mean, you can see the contacts are corroded here. I'm guessing it was an issue with this end of stroke switch that caused it to burn up. But anyway, what I was saying, the System 11 games use this bad conical spring design. And the issue with this spring is it's just gonna wear on your flipper pawl right here, right on the pivot arm. It's just gonna wear on it over time. You don't get a nice snap out of it. So if you order a flipper rebuild kit from Marco's or Pinball Life, you want to get the flipper arms that have the spring tab on the end, and this is the WPC style spring tab, and it uses the long spring with the hook in it, and it's going to give you a much snappier feel, and you won't have that conical spring riding on your flipper. So I suggest getting one of those, and then you'll need the correct springs to do so. Now if you order the kit from Marco's, it'll come with these arms, and it'll give you the new conical springs if you want to use them, but they also give you these springs and new capacitor, new end of stroke, new coil stop. They give you everything you need so that you can do it the WPC style, so you get a much snappier flipper. So we are going to do that, but there is one modification necessary to do it, and it's not a big one. It's fairly easy. So before we do any removing of wires and resoldering, the modification necessary is that, I'll zoom in here. Right here on this bracket where your capacitor gets zip tied, we are going to have to put a 1/16 inch hole for the ring at the end of the spring to go through and attach to the spring tab. So it's a 1/16 drill bit that we're gonna have to drill a hole here, and it is 0.11 inches, which I believe is 2 millimeters from the side, and 0.75 inches up from the bottom. So like right here above this hole is going to be a small hole for our spring to attach. That is the only modification necessary to use the WPC style ones. The other one is that you'll need the correct end of stroke switch, but if you order the kit from Marco's, it comes with all of this. Because System 11, your end of stroke switch is a high power end of stroke switch, not a low power. So the high power end of stroke switches, they're gonna stay closed, and when your flipper spins, it's going to open up that end of stroke switch like this. So on System 11 games, it's normally closed, and on WPC games, it's normally open. So that's, I mean, that the reason for the capacitor is because it's a high power end of stroke switch, and it's to minimize the spark and just the delay on it as well, just to give the CPU a little delay. Yeah, so we have a new end of stroke switch. We have everything to rebuild this. We might have to fight a little bit with this coil to get it out, but all I'm gonna do, I'm not gonna desolder any wires. I am just going to take the end of stroke switch off, and we are going to cut the zip tie on our capacitor. So end of stroke switch off on both sides right there. Okay, we're good there. I'm gonna cut the zip tie on my capacitor there. So now our capacitor is free, and it looks like there was some two-sided tape there, so we might have to remove that. So now that is taken off, and that will be free to remove once, there we go, two-sided tape's off. Okay, so now that is completely loose and out of the way, and we're gonna be replacing this coil as well. So we'll need our 5/32 Allen key, our hex bit, to remove our coil stop. All right, so that is the coil stop removed. And our coil is completely seized inside of there. And I'm trying to see, there we go, it's starting to move. And with a little bit of force, we got it out. So our arm is completely out now, and we really don't even need to worry about getting this. There we go. Now that's off. Yeah, you can see, look inside of that. The sleeve just completely melted inside of there from the high voltage. So yeah, our coil stop is off, and we can leave this together in an assembly. We can leave our coil and capacitor and end of stroke switch together all as one, and we will use that as a guide as we go to rebuild it after. But now that is everything removed. We will put we have new screws for this plate that came with our rebuild kit, so those new screws will go on for this plate. And another thing that doesn't come with the kits, nylon flipper bushings and new screws and nuts for the flipper bushings. If these get worn out, your flipper is going to have a lot of play side to side. So you want to replace these nylon flipper bushings every time you do a flipper rebuild. I don't know why to this day they still don't come with the kits. They should come with all the kits. I always recommend doing it if it's never been done. And in the future, it won't really need to be done as you're maintaining your game, because everyone, I think it's around like 1 million flips or something like that, you're supposed to rebuild your flippers. So you don't really need to do it every time you rebuild your flippers, but on a game where the flippers have never been rebuilt, like this Whirlwind, you need to replace that nylon flipper bushing. So yeah, the last thing for us to remove is our flipper bushing. All right guys, so I'm back from drilling our hole in our plate right here. If you look closely, I drilled a 1/16 hole right here. It's 2.5 millimeters from the side and 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom. And you'll be left with a small 1/16 hole for our spring to go on to connect to the arm of the flipper. So now that that's done, I went ahead and I put my new screws on this bracket as well. I cleaned up this bracket the best that I could, and now we are going to swap out our flipper bushing. So bushing is going to go through just like this, and the screws come from the top side through the flipper bushing like this, and then we put our nuts on the back. So I need to get 3 of these screws out. And I'm just going to get these lined up and hand tight. Whoops. All right, so now these are on, and we'll just get these started. And again, this bracket's threaded. The nuts are on the other side as a measure of really just security, to make sure that it's nice and tight the way you want it to be. So what I like to do is I usually put the screw all the way in, and then once the screw is all the way in, then I put the nuts on the back side. And I'm just making sure these are tight. All right, so those are nice and tight. We got our screws through the back side of the flipper. We'll get 3 of our nuts out. And I'm just going to start these. There we go. All right, and we got our nuts on the back side, and now I just want to tighten these up a little bit, and then I will grab my nut driver and come to the other side of these and tighten them up. All right guys, so I went ahead and grabbed my 5/16 nut driver and just tightened up the nuts on the back side of this bracket. So we got new screws, new nuts, new flipper bushing. That's all good to go. So now we are at the point where we're pretty much ready to turn on the soldering iron, and we're going to put our new capacitor on. Our new end of stroke switch is going to get wired up. We're just going to swap our wires over to all the new parts, then we can mount it and just go from there. So Let me just wait for this to heat up and we'll get our solder ready. We'll just move this to the side for now because we're mainly going to be focused on this right here. So the main thing I'm focused on here is we are going to get these wires free from the end of stroke switch. So I'm just coming at this with some heat, try to get this wire free. That wire is free. And we will do the same on this side as well. There we go. Both wires free from the coil. So the coil can go over there. Make sure you take a picture of that before you mess with anything. And we really don't need to desolder this capacitor here. All I need off of this are these sleeves. I'm going to reuse these black sleeves. So I am going to take the cap off if I can get it off. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I want to reuse these black sleeves. I'm going to reuse them. So and this one's actually a little long for this one. So we can cut this down a little bit. See if that's better. A little bit shorter, but that's not bad. That should be pretty good. Yeah, that should be all right for us to be able to wrap it and keep that on. I imagine we'll probably want the same length on the next one, so I'm just going to go ahead and preemptively cut a little bit off. And we'll put this one on as well. Alright, that's not bad. That's pretty much exactly how I want the capacitor to be soldered on there. Just like the way it is. So all we are going to do is I wrapped both edges of the capacitor to the switch here. So all I'm going to do is come with my new solder and we're just going to add a little bit of solder right to this switch. So it takes a little bit of effort to get the new rings around it and add what you need to add, but you want to get it wrapped around so you get a nice solid joint. And I'm going to add as much solder as I can here because next our wires are going to get hooked up. And we are going to do the same thing on this side. Just be careful you don't take the casing out. I'm just going to add a little bit more here. I might have to put a piece of electrical tape around that to get it to hold, melt it a little bit when heating up. All right, so now we can take our wires, and I'm just going to actually, you know what? I'm going to wait to solder the wires onto this until we get it on the bracket. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to transfer these wires over to the new coil. So we are just going to shove this through the hole of our new coil. What I usually like to do is just kind of wrap it up if I can. And then just add some solder. All right, and there's a nice solid solder joint on that one, and then we will do the same thing on the other side, and we'll just make sure our diodes are the correct way and our diodes are the right way. So we'll just take our next wire and we will do the exact same thing. All right, so now our old melted coil can get out of the way. And again, we can just bend this up a little bit how we would want it to be. Just make sure you get it how you want it. And now we're just going to come in and add our solder. And I'm going to try to pull this down and straighten it out. I'm just going to try to straighten this out. I don't like the way it's sitting. Alright, so now both of those wires are sitting just how I would like them to. I'm going to heat up the solder on the other ends of the wires here to try to clean these up, so when we attach them to our end of stroke, it's not as much of a pain. Alright, so those are both a little bit better than how they were. Alright. Now we're in a position that we can mount this. Yeah, I think just given the way that we're gonna have to sneak these wires in here, I would rather mount the end of stroke switch first before we hook up the two wires. So our end of stroke switch is gonna go just like this. We'll get it lined up with our bracket here, and our capacitor is going to have to shift a little bit. I'm just trying to get lined up here. Oh, no wonder I got it backwards. This bracket has to go on the other side of the end of stroke switch. So it'll go through and then thread all the way at the end. So all I'm doing here is tightening this, and I'm trying to get it so that it is straight with our bracket here. That way when the flipper has to hit the end of stroke, it's nice and straight. Alright, that looks nice and solid for me. So now it's just going to be transferring these wires over, and I'm going to take a look at my picture here. The right wire looks like it was going to that one. It looks like they crossed. So the end of stroke, so the side closest to me goes up to the inner wire. Yeah, the middle wire on the bracket. Alright, so the middle coil wire runs to the long edge of the end of stroke. So all I'm going to do is get this nice and straight. I'm going to heat up Alright, so both of our wires are on. Wasn't the prettiest of soldering jobs, but they're on nice and tight, just the way you would want them to be. So now our coil can go on. We have our new coil sleeve in here, and you want your diodes towards the, away from the coil stop, so the way that we have it right here. We will zip tie this capacitor on last, but what I want to do next is get out 2 of these lock washers and then 2 of our new coil stop screws, and next we're going to put the coil stop on. So again, these lock washers go through here, and then our coil stop is going to go on the end through our coil sleeve, and it's just going to go just like this. And when you put this in, you're going to need to tighten the coil by squeezing both sides with your hand, and you want to just get everything lined up here and get it hand tight first, and then we are going to tighten this down. And actually I should have put this in before we put the coil stop on. Hold on. Let me pull off the coil stop. Alright, so you're going to have to shove the flipper pawl and arm through. Make sure you have it the correct way to go all the way through. So now we got basically our whole flipper assembly together, and now our coil stop can go on. So just 2 of these hex screws here. So So I will get out the correct hex size for this, and we will tighten these up. So you just want to grab the end of the coil stop, and as you're tightening these up, you want to grab both the coil stop and the side that the flipper pawl is coming through. So got that nice and tight. So just go ahead and come at it again, and you want your coil stop to be very tight. So that is super tight on that one as well. All right. So that's nice and tight there. We basically have the entire thing back together. First, I'm going to zip tie our capacitor on. So I'm just going to pass a zip tie like this. And this is going to get zip tied on. So now we can go ahead and cut the zip tie off this. Actually, I'll cut a little bit more. I don't want to leave that much slack. That should be all right. So we got our zip tie nice and tight, and the stroke switch hooked up the correct way. And now the only thing that we have to do is put our spring on, and we have rebuilt this entire flipper. So this is a WPC style spring because we're using the new arm. So one side of the spring, and sometimes you gotta like unspin these a little bit. They aren't the most fun to work with. That should be fine the way it is. I just needed to fix the spring a little bit. But now we have our wire nice and strong there, Our capacitor's hooked up and zip tied, just the way that we want it to be. Just go ahead and push this down a little bit so it's out of the way. That's good. We got our wires wrapped through. If we take a look at our picture, make sure both of our wires are hooked up the right way. So our longer leaf here, we want that to go to the middle one, which is the way that it goes. And then our inner leaf goes up to this right lug. So that is the correct way. So now I can go ahead, go back to the cabinet. I'm going to go ahead and mount this with our 7 wood screws on the bottom of the cabinet, and then we can solder our last 2 wires on from inside the game and go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and get this hooked back up to the bottom of the playfield and then solder our 2 wires on, and then we can put the flipper bat through the top of the playfield, get it gapped properly, and go ahead and test it. So I'm going to get this back on the bottom of the playfield and we will go from there. Alright guys, so I went ahead and I mounted our full flipper assembly back onto the bottom of the playfield with our 7 1/4-inch wood screws. I put my soldering iron in the cab. We put our blue and yellow on the top lug and our blue and purple on the bottom lug, along with our end of stroke wire. I already went ahead and shoved my flipper through the top of the playfield. I have it leaned up right now. Our flipper bat is through the top of the playfield, so now all we have to do is gap this with our Marco's flipper gap tool, and what it does is you put this underneath the bat of the flipper, and it ensures you have a proper gap to the top of the playfield so you don't cause any damage. So I got it loosened right now and shoved through the play field. You can see our spring right there. And yeah, we're pretty much just ready to set this thing up and tighten it up. So I'm going to move the camera over to this side, and that's actually a decent angle right there. And all I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to take my socket and get it on the underside of the play field here. So basically, we just want this in its rest position to be perfectly lined up with the ball guide here. And aside from being lined up with the ball guide, we want to push the flipper down so our gap tool is properly gapping the flipper. So now we got this in here, our gap tool here, so now we can just go ahead and we'll tighten this thing up till we get it somewhat tight. And once it's tight, then we will worry about lining it up with the ball guide. So all right, so we're starting to get to the point where it is almost tight. So now we need to be, and I'm getting in the way of the camera, I know, but I need to be able to see how we're lined up with the ball guide here. All right, right there. Make sure we got our gap set. All right, let me just lower the play field one more time. There we go. I'm pretty happy with how that is lined up. So let me angle the camera down and we can look at how it's lined up. Actually, I'll take it off the tripod so we can look at it, and then we'll go ahead and power the game on and test it. But so you'll see, let me zoom out a little bit. This is the old flipper. This one I think was replaced at one point because that looks like a newer bat, and this is the one we just replaced with the orange rubber on it. And let me make sure my rubber's fully on now that that's through. But we got the flipper properly gapped. It's super tight under the play field. And if you look at the way the ball feeds down the lane, I like to have the rubber completely straight with that, just like how I have it. So you want to look at the rubber. The orange rubber is on a straight line from the metal, and then you get a clean straight feed to your flipper. So that is entire flipper gapped and put back together. So now we can go ahead and let me make sure there's nothing in the bottom of the game that would cause any issues. No, it should be good. I pulled the soldering iron out, so let me turn it on. And hopefully, now that we replaced that coil, we don't have any other issues. So let me put this back on the tripod. So let's see if we can start a game real quick here.
Oh. looks like rain.
Nice shot up the ramp there. Shoot the spinner. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off, and I want to look at our end of stroke switch here because the plate or the flipper does seem a little bit weak, and I wonder if it's, I think it might be our spring, honestly. Okay, I think I see what our issue is. Our contacts need to get bent back a little bit. It was hitting, it looks like our end of stroke switch is hitting the low power a little too soon. And you need it to be set perfectly tight on these System 11 games for it to work right. It looks a little bit better. And again, this is with our new cabinet switches as well, so it's going to take a little bit of tweaking to get all this right.
Oh, looks like rain.
Oh, reject. Yeah, it seemed like it was our end of stroke switch because our bottom right flipper seems super nice and snappy now. I just want to show you guys what we're looking with here. So now that we adjusted our end of stroke switch, this thing is super snappy and perfectly lined up, and that orange flipper rubber looks awesome, but super snappy. Still snappy, but listen to that. That is just the way that we want that to be. So now that we did this right flipper, I'm gonna go ahead and do the left flipper and then the top right flipper off camera, and we'll come back. Another thing I forgot to show you guys, so I ended up putting the original legs on. I polished these things up like crazy. I got new leg bolts and I got leg protectors for it. Rebuilt our shooter rod, new flipper buttons and cabinet switches on the side, and we know those work because we're using them right now. I got the glass off, but I'm gonna rebuild the other two flippers, and then we'll probably stop there for this episode. So I'll rebuild those, come back, take a look at those, maybe play a game, and then we'll go from there. So. All right, guys, so it's the next day here. I found some time to continue rebuilding and finished both the left flipper and the upper right flipper. So both of these got rebuilt the same way that we rebuilt our other one. Brand new linkage, pawl assembly. We did the WPC mod for the springs. We drilled our hole, new capacitor. I did new coils on both of these because the diodes looked, the solder job on the diodes did not look good. So I was not confident in those diodes. End of stroke switch is set up nice and snappy and gapped properly, just how we want it to be gapped. And same thing up top. Everything was clean, new coil, linkage, assembly, everything brand new. We can go ahead and lower the play field, and I can show you exactly what I'm talking about here. All right, just had to put the camera down for a second. So we got brand new Williams flipper bats from Pinball Life. I've played a few games, so they're already starting to get a little dirty. I need to clean this play field. I'm not going to tear everything down with this one, but I do want to clean and wax before we call this one done. So I need to do that in the next episode for sure. But brand new flipper bat, orange rubber from Titan Rubber. Replace this with orange. These are lined up perfectly with our ball guides and lined up perfectly with the ball guide up top. So these are nice and rebuilt, nice and snappy. I'll start a quick game. I'm not even going to finish one. I'm just going to start it. Actually, I don't even need to set up the tripod. I can just start it and show you.
Oh, looks like rain.
Show you how snappy they are. Nice and snappy with our end of stroke set up at our perfect 1/8 of an inch gap. Nice and snappy, all new flipper parts. So we're looking nice and good and rebuilt here. So go ahead and plunge the ball. Not enough behind that. Playing with one hand right now. All right, you can go ahead and turn her off. I'll turn it back on too while we're at it. But yeah, that is entire flipper assembly rebuilt on System 11, doing the drilling for the WPC style springs, so you can use the new assemblies to get a nice snappier flip out of it. It's a lot snappier than the original. So, and you won't have the issue of the conical spring wearing on your flipper arm. So completely rebuilt the flippers, and we're looking good in that regard. That was pretty much all I wanted to do for this episode. So we got our plunger shooter rod has been completely reassembled. I put the new polished, well, not new, but I polished the legs, cabinet protectors, new cabinet buttons with new leaf switches on both sides, the double on this side, single on that side. And then we put in new flipper bats and full flipper assemblies with new coils. So all the main things that I wanted to rebuild on this game are done. I pretty much just need to handle putting a new topper on. I got some trim for the back glass. I want to put an NV RAM in the board, so I'll show you guys how to desolder a RAM, install a socket, and put an NV RAM in. But that is pretty much it for this week's episode. Pretty basic with this one. We won't be doing a full teardown and restoration on this, because in order to do so, I would like to take the playfield out of the cabinet, and right now it's in good enough shape that it does not need to be pulled out. Somebody took very good care of this game. It was rebuilt recently. We just need to clean and replace some rubbers and do a few things like that. But there's really nothing on this game that's going to need a lot of attention. It was really just the flippers that I was worried the most about, and the topper, and we have a new topper already. I'm gonna install a topper light mod, stuff like that. So really nothing too crazy here, out of the ordinary from the normal stuff that we're used to rebuilding. So yeah, like I said, this one not too bad. Completely rebuilt all three flippers, just the basic things that I always do on every game that I get. So we're done with that, and then this one will get a couple more things, and then I can go in the lineup, and yeah, we hopefully won't have to touch it for a while until we got to touch it again. So that wraps up this week's episode for the Whirlwind restoration. Just more of a cleanup than a restoration. But yeah, that wraps it up for this week. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll pick up next week. We'll do the NV RAM, and we'll eventually get to the new topper based on how long the NV RAM takes. But yeah, we'll pick up next week. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching, guys.